In the glass towers of Silicon Valley, a brilliant executive was about to face the ultimate betrayal. What started as a routine board meeting took a shocking turn when they came face to face with corporate politics at its most brutal. Aurora Smith wasn't your typical tech employee. For 18 years, she had spent her life transforming a dying startup into a billion-dollar empire, known for her revolutionary innovations and unwavering loyalty. When she encountered the board's decision to pass her over for CEO, she had no idea she was walking into a war that would consume everything she'd built. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany table stretched before Aurora Smith like an altar of broken promises. 18 years of her life had led to this moment. This boardroom where she'd fought 1,000 battles, celebrated countless victories, and built an empire from the remnants of a dying startup. The morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast long shadows across the polished surface. Shadows that seemed to dance with the nervous energy crackling through the room. Aurora's hands rested flat on the table, steady despite the earthquake building in her chest. Around her, the 12 members of Nexus Technologies' board of directors shuffled papers with the measured precision of executioners preparing their tools. She'd known these faces for years, some since the company's scrappy beginning when they operated out of a converted warehouse. David Thornton sat at the head of the table, his silver hair gleaming under the recessed lighting, his expression carefully neutral in that way that meant bad news was coming. Aurora, David began, his voice carrying the weight of manufactured gravitas. Your contributions to Nexus over the past 18 years have been extraordinary. The pause made her skin crawl. Have been, past tense. As if her career at the company she'd helped resurrect was already over. Aurora's mind catalogued every micro-expression around the table. The way Michael Foster wouldn't meet her eyes, how Jennifer Walsh kept adjusting her glasses, the subtle tension in Thomas Wright's jaw. These were people she'd trusted, people she'd bled for during the company's darkest hours. However, David continued, and there it was, the word that would cleave her world in two. The board has decided that Nexus needs fresh leadership to navigate the challenges ahead. Someone with a different perspective, unburdened by our historical approaches. Aurora felt something cold and sharp unfurl in her stomach. The CEO position, her position, the role she'd earned through sleepless nights and revolutionary innovations, was slipping away. But who could they possibly think was more qualified than the woman who'd single-handedly saved their bleeding company not once, but 3 times? I'm pleased to announce, David's smile was perfectly calibrated, that Marcus Chen will be joining us as our new chief executive officer. The name hit Aurora like a physical blow. Marcus Chen, Harvard MBA, McKinsey consultant, a man who'd never built anything lasting, never stayed anywhere long enough to see a vision through to completion. A man whose greatest achievement was a PowerPoint presentation that had impressed boards across Silicon Valley, while delivering exactly nothing of substance. She watched him enter through the side door as if summoned by David's announcement. Tall, immaculately dressed, radiating the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to prove yourself. His smile was practiced, his handshake firm as he made his way around the table. When he reached Aurora, his grip lingered just a moment too long. Aurora, Marcus said, his voice warm honey over steel. I've heard so much about your work here. I'm looking forward to learning from your experience. Learning from, not working with, not building upon, learning from. As if she were a textbook to be studied rather than a leader to be respected. Aurora's smile felt like broken glass in her mouth. Welcome to Nexus, Marcus. I'm sure you'll find it, education. David was speaking again, something about transition periods and knowledge transfer, but Aurora's attention had fractured. She was thinking about the night she'd spent in this very boardroom 7 years ago, when Nexus was hemorrhaging money, and their biggest client was threatening to walk. She'd presented a restructuring plan that everyone said was impossible, a complete pivot that would take them from struggling hardware manufacturer to cutting-edge software innovator. The same men who now sat around this table had called her crazy, but she'd made it work, staying in the office for 3 months straight, surviving on coffee and sheer determination. She remembered the acquisition of TechFlow Solutions. The deal everyone said was too risky, too expensive. Aurora had seen the potential in their machine learning algorithms before anyone knew what to call it. She'd negotiated that deal herself, flying to Seattle in a snowstorm when their CEO refused to take meetings via video call. That acquisition had tripled their valuation. And the Harmony project, her baby, her revolutionary approach to enterprise software that had put Nexus on the map as an industry leader. She'd conceived it, designed it, shepherded it through development while fighting skeptics both inside and outside the company. It now generated 40% of their revenue. 18 years of her life, 18 years of sacrifice, innovation and unwavering loyalty, and they'd given her job to a consultant who'd never stayed anywhere longer than 2 years. Aurora will be transitioning to a senior advisory role, David was saying, and she wanted to laugh at the transparent euphemism, advisory role. They were pushing her aside, wrapping her demotion in corporate speak and hoping she'd go quietly. She looked around the table again, really seeing them this time. Michael Foster, whose investment firm had nearly bankrupted itself before Aurora's innovations saved them all. Jennifer Walsh, who Aurora had personally recruited when no other tech company would hire a woman with her background. Even Thomas Wright, founder, visionary, the man who'd hired her fresh out of MIT, couldn't meet her eyes. The betrayal was complete, calculated, and devastating in its casual cruelty. "I'm sure this comes as a surprise," David continued, his tone carrying just enough false sympathy to make Aurora's teeth ache. "But we felt it was important to bring in someone with Marcus's particular skill set. His experience with large-scale organizational transformation and stakeholder management will be invaluable as we move forward." Organizational transformation, stakeholder management, buzzwords, empty phrases that meant nothing and everything. What David wasn't saying hung in the air like smoke. "We need a man. We need someone who looks the part. We need someone who won't challenge us the way you do." Aurora had spent years watching this same scenario play out across Silicon Valley. Brilliant women pushed aside for men with the right pedigree, the right connections, the right chromosomes. She'd told herself Nexus was different. She'd believed in their mission, their values, their commitment to merit over politics. How naive she'd been. "I understand this is a significant change," Marcus was saying now, his voice oiled with practiced empathy. "I want you to know that I have tremendous respect for what you've built here, Aurora. Your institutional knowledge will be crucial during this transition." Institutional knowledge, another euphemism. They wanted her brain, her understanding of systems, clients and vulnerabilities, but not her leadership. They wanted to strip mine her expertise while sidelining her authority. Aurora stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. Every eye in the room tracked her motion, waiting to see how she'd react. Would she scream, cry, storm out? She could feel their anticipation, their discomfort with her silence. "Thank you for this opportunity," she said finally, her voice steady as bedrock. "I'm sure Marcus will bring exactly what Nexus deserves." The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone. David's eyes narrowed slightly, but his politician's smile never wavered. "We're grateful for your understanding," he said. "The transition will begin immediately, of course. We'd like you to work closely with Marcus over the next few weeks to ensure continuity. They wanted her to train her own replacement, to smile and nod while a man with half her experience and none of her vision took credit for everything she'd built. Aurora gathered her leather portfolio with movements as precise as a surgeon's. Each document inside represented years of strategy, planning and innovation, financial projections she'd personally crafted, market analyses that had guided million-dollar decisions, partnership agreements she'd negotiated in rooms where she was often the only woman. "I'll be in touch about the transition schedule," she said, her tone perfectly professional. "I want to ensure Marcus has everything he needs to succeed." As she walked toward the door, Aurora caught her reflection in the polished surface of the conference table. For just a moment, she saw herself as she truly was, not the loyal executive who'd given everything to this company, but something else, something harder, something dangerous. The Aurora Smith who walked out of that boardroom was not the same woman who had entered it an hour before. That Aurora had believed in loyalty, in merit, in playing by rules that were rigged against her from the start. This Aurora understood that in Silicon Valley's Game of Thrones, loyalty was weakness and mercy was suicide. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft whisper, cutting her off from the life she'd known. As the floors counted down, Aurora began to plan, not for defeat, but for war. The elevator descended with mechanical precision, each floor marking Aurora's fall from grace. 23rd floor where she'd negotiated the partnership with Global Tech. 15th floor where her engineering team had their breakthrough on the quantum processing protocol. Ground floor where everything she'd built meant nothing. Aurora's reflection stared back at her from the polished steel doors, and for a moment she didn't recognize the woman looking back. The same sharp blazer, the same perfectly styled auburn hair, the same green eyes that had stared down hostile investors and skeptical clients. But something fundamental had shifted behind those eyes. The naive optimism that had sustained her through 18 years of corporate warfare had been surgically removed, leaving something colder in its wake. The parking garage felt like a tomb. Her Tesla sat alone under the harsh fluorescent lights, a monument to success that now felt hollow. Aurora slid behind the wheel and sat in the silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. The leather seat still held the warmth of this morning's commute, when she'd been a different person with different expectations. Senior advisory role. The phrase echoed in her mind like a death knell. She could see the trajectory clearly now. They'd keep her around for a few months to extract every last ounce of institutional knowledge, then quietly ease her out with a generous severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. A footnote in the company's official history. If she was lucky. Aurora pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. The contact list felt like an archaeology of her life, hundreds of professional connections, clients, colleagues, but precious few personal relationships. She scrolled past names that represented deals closed, crises managed, careers built, until she found the one that mattered. Zoe Rodriguez, the brilliant engineer who'd been her protégé, her closest ally, and perhaps her only real friend in the corporate maze. Aurora's finger hovered over the call button. Zoe had resigned 3 weeks ago in anticipation of Aurora's promotion to CEO, taking a position at a smaller startup where she could have more creative control. She'd been so confident that Aurora would get the recognition she deserved. The phone rang twice before Zoe's familiar voice filled the car. "Aurora, please tell me you're calling with good news about the board meeting." Aurora closed her eyes. Even now, with the betrayal still burning in her chest, she found herself wanting to protect Zoe from the truth. But that impulse belonged to the old Aurora, the one who believed in playing by the rules, in protecting others from unpleasant realities. "They gave it to Marcus Chen," Aurora said, her voice flat as granite. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Aurora could hear Zoe's sharp intake of breath, could practically see her former head of engineering's face cycling through disbelief, anger and recognition. "Those bastards," Zoe whispered, "after everything you've done for them, after saving their asses how many times?" 3, Aurora said automatically. 3 times I pulled this company back from the brink, and they gave my job to a consultant who's never built anything in his life. Marcus Chen. Zoe's voice carried a note of recognition. "Wait, isn't he the guy who drove Pinnacle Systems into the ground with that disastrous merger?" "The very same." Aurora felt a bitter smile tug at her lips. "But he has the right pedigree, Harvard MBA, McKinsey background, and most importantly, he's not me." Aurora started the car and pulled out of the garage, emerging into the San Francisco afternoon like a submarine surfacing in hostile waters. The city spread before her, glass towers reaching toward the sky, each one housing dreams and ambitions and broken promises. How many other women had driven these same streets, their careers sabotaged by boardrooms full of men who saw them as brilliant assistants rather than potential leaders? "Where are you now?" Zoe asked. "Driving home, to my empty apartment, to my sterile life." Aurora's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. 18 years, Zoe, 18 years of 60-hour weeks, missed birthdays, canceled vacations. "I haven't spoken to my sister in 3 years. I can't remember the last time I went on a date. And for what? So they could pat me on the head and tell me I'm not CEO material." The traffic light turned red, and Aurora found herself staring at a billboard advertising the latest tech conference. Innovation Through Leadership, it proclaimed, featuring a panel of 5 executives, all men, all white, all wearing the same confident smile that Marcus Chen had worn in the boardroom. Aurora Zoe's voice cut through her spiral of anger. What are you going to do? The question hung in the air like a challenge. What was she going to do, accept the advisory role and fade into irrelevance? Take a position at another company and hope they'd treat her better? File a discrimination lawsuit that would drag on for years while destroying what remained of her reputation? I'm going to remember something I learned a long time ago, Aurora said finally. In my first year at Nexus, when we were still struggling, I made a mistake. A big one. Cost us a major client. I was devastated, ready to quit. But Thomas Wright told me something that I've never forgotten. She turned onto the bridge, the bay stretching out below like a mirror reflecting the late afternoon sun. He said that in Silicon Valley you're either predator or prey. There's no middle ground. I've spent 18 years trying to be something else. A collaborator, a team player, a loyal soldier. But loyalty is just another word for prey. Aurora's penthouse apartment occupied the top 2 floors of a converted warehouse in Soma, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the bay that had cost her a fortune she'd earned through sleepless nights and sheer determination. She'd bought it 5 years ago as a symbol of her success, but now it felt like a mausoleum. The space was immaculate, designed by professionals who specialized in creating environments that looked lived in without actually being lived in. Bookshelves lined with business biographies she'd never had time to read, a kitchen equipped with appliances she'd never learned to use, art carefully selected to impress clients and colleagues who rarely visited. Aurora poured herself 3 fingers of 20-year-old scotch and stood at the windows, watching the city transform as twilight approached. Somewhere down there, Marcus Chen was probably celebrating with his wife, planning his first 100 days as CEO. Somewhere down there, David Thornton was congratulating himself on making the practical choice. I built this company, she said aloud, her voice echoing in the empty space. I saved it. I transformed it. And they think they can just discard me. She thought about the Harmony project, still her greatest achievement. The revolutionary software platform that had positioned Nexus as an industry leader, generating billions in revenue. She'd conceived it during one of her sleepless nights, seeing patterns and possibilities that no one else had recognized. The code architecture, the user interface design, the integration protocols, all of it had flowed from her vision, but Marcus Chen would take credit for it now. He'd stand on stages at tech conferences, presenting her innovations as his strategic initiatives. The thought made her jaw clench with such force that her teeth ached. Aurora walked to her home office, a shrine to 18 years of corporate achievement. Awards lined the walls: Industry Innovator of the Year, Technology Leadership Excellence, Strategic Vision Award. Photographs captured moments of triumph, signing the Global Tech Partnership, launching the Harmony platform, celebrating another record quarter. In one frame, she stood beside David Thornton and Thomas Wright at the company's 10-year anniversary party. She looked so young, so hopeful, so utterly convinced that merit would triumph over politics. The woman in that photograph believed the world was fair, that hard work was rewarded, that talent spoke louder than gender. That woman was dead now, murdered in a boardroom by men who saw her brilliance as a threat rather than an asset. Aurora sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The Nexus corporate directory glowed on the screen, hundreds of names, contact information, organizational charts that mapped the company's power structure. She knew these people, had hired many of them, had mentored them through challenges and celebration. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision, creating a new document. Not a resignation letter that would come later. This was something else entirely. A list of every key employee who owed their career to her guidance, every client relationship she'd personally cultivated, every strategic advantage she'd discovered and developed. If Nexus wanted to treat her as disposable, she would show them exactly how much they had to lose. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Whatever you're planning, I'm in. Aurora smiled for the first time since leaving the boardroom. not the practiced corporate smile she'd perfected over the years, but something genuine and dangerous. She typed back, "Good, because I'm going to need the best engineers in the valley." For what? Aurora's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she considered her response. The old Aurora would have played it safe, would have taken the high road, would have graciously accepted defeat and moved on with dignity intact. But the old Aurora was gone. To build something better, she typed. And to show them what happens when you betray someone who knows all your secrets. The city lights twinkled below like stars, each one representing a dream, an ambition, a potential ally in the war she was about to wage. Aurora raised her glass to the window, toasting the woman she used to be and the woman she was becoming. "Game on," she whispered to the night. Aurora's phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m., the vibration cutting through the silence of her apartment like a blade. She'd been awake for hours, sitting at her kitchen island with her laptop open, watching the sunrise paint the bay in shades of gold and crimson. The document on her screen had grown throughout the night. Names, contact information, strategic assessments, weakness, a battle plan disguised as a spreadsheet. The caller ID made her smile. Zoe Rodriguez. Always an early riser. Always ready to dive into the impossible. "Tell me you didn't stay up all night plotting," Zoe said without preamble. "I prefer the term strategic planning." Aurora replied, taking a sip of her coffee. It was her 5th cup, but she felt more alert than she had in months. Clarity had a way of cutting through exhaustion. "And what did your strategic planning conclude?" Aurora scrolled through her document. 47 names, 47 people whose careers she'd shaped, whose potential she'd recognized, whose loyalty she'd earned through mentorship and advocacy. 47 weapons in her arsenal. "That I've been thinking too small." Aurora, "For 18 years I've played by their rules, worked within their system, hoped that merit would eventually triumph. But the game was rigged from the beginning." She stood and walked to the window, phone pressed to her ear. Below, the city was waking up. Early commuters heading to jobs where they'd spend their days building other people's dreams. Aurora had done the same thing for nearly 2 decades, and where had it gotten her? "I'm starting a company," she said. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us." Now back to the story. The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats. "Aurora, Apex Solutions, I've already filed the paperwork. I have the funding, my savings, plus some very interested angel investors who've been watching Nexus's stock price lately. Turns out a lot of people have questions about their leadership decisions. This is about revenge. This is about justice." Aurora corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Aurora had asked herself the same thing during the long night, staring at the list of names on her screen. Was she seeking justice for all the brilliant women who'd been passed over, or was she simply angry that it had happened to her? "Come have breakfast with me," Aurora said. "I'll show you what I'm building." An hour later, Zoe sat across from Aurora at a small cafe in the Mission, her dark hair pulled back in its usual practical ponytail, her brown eyes sharp with curiosity and concern. She'd driven down from Berkeley where she was supposed to start her new job in 3 days. Instead, she was listening to Aurora outline a plan that would either revolutionize the industry or destroy them both. "The quantum processing protocol," Zoe said, stirring her coffee absently. "That's still proprietary to Nexus. The current implementation is." Aurora agreed. "But the underlying principles, the mathematical foundations, those came from research we published years ago, and I happen to know exactly how to improve on the existing design." Zoe's engineering mind was already working through the possibilities. Aurora could see it in the way her friend's eyes lit up, the way her fingers drummed against the table. The efficiency improvements alone would be game-changing. But Aurora, the development timeline. 6 months, Aurora said. "Maybe 8 if we're being conservative, but only with the right team." The right team meaning. Aurora slid a tablet across the table. The screen displayed an organizational chart, not for Nexus, but for Apex Solutions. Names filled boxes connected by lines of authority and collaboration. At the top, 2 boxes sat side by side. CEO Aurora Smith, and CTO Zoe Rodriguez, equal partners, Aurora said quietly. Not my employee, not my subordinate, my partner. Zoe stared at the chart, her finger tracing the lines of connection. You've been busy. I've been thorough. Look at the engineering team. Zoe scrolled down, and Aurora watched her friend's eyebrows rise. The proposed engineering team read like a who's who of Silicon Valley talent, but more specifically, like a roster of people who'd left Nexus over the past 2 years, due to frustration with the company's increasingly risk-averse culture. Maria Santos left Nexus 6 months ago because they wouldn't fund her blockchain integration project. Aurora said, she's currently freelancing, taking contracts that don't challenge her. David Kim resigned when they passed him over for promotion again. He's at a startup that's going nowhere fast. Jennifer Walsh is technically still at Nexus, but she's been looking for an exit ever since they killed the AI ethics initiative she'd been developing. You've talked to them? Not yet, but I will. Today. Aurora leaned forward. Zoe, these people are brilliant. They're frustrated. They're undervalued, and they all have one thing in common. They believe in building something meaningful, not just profitable. Zoe set down the tablet and looked directly at Aurora. And what exactly are we building? Beyond improved quantum processing, beyond revenge against Marcus Chen, what's the real vision here? Aurora had been waiting for this question. It was the right question, the one that separated genuine innovation from corporate vengeance. Remember when we started at Nexus? Aurora said, when it was just a handful of engineers in a converted warehouse, working 80-hour weeks because we believed we were changing the world. Before the board meetings and the quarterly earnings calls and the endless presentations to investors who cared more about margins than innovation. I remember. That's what we're building. A company that puts technology first, that values merit over politics, that gives brilliant people the resources and freedom to do their best work. Aurora's voice carried a passion that had been absent for months. We're going to show the industry what's possible when you build something from the ground up without the baggage of legacy thinking and entrenched bias. And if we happen to poach Nexus's best talent and biggest clients in the process. Aurora's smile was sharp as winter moonlight. Well, that's just good business. 3 hours later, Aurora sat in her Tesla outside a Starbucks in Palo Alto, watching Maria Santos through the window. The brilliant Latina engineer was bent over her laptop, surrounded by the detritus of a freelancer's life. Coffee cups, notebooks, charging cable. Maria had been one of Aurora's first hires 8 years ago, a Berkeley PhD, who'd revolutionized Nexus's data architecture before growing frustrated with the company's unwillingness to take risks. Aurora checked her phone. In 30 minutes, she had a call scheduled with David Kim. At 2 o'clock, a coffee meeting with Jennifer Walsh. By evening, she'd have spoken to 12 of the names on her list. The recruitment phase of her plan was beginning. She walked into the Starbucks and approached Maria's table. Mind if Maria looked up, and her face cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope. Aurora, congratulations on the CEO position. Actually, Aurora said, settling into the chair across from her former colleague. That's not why I'm here. For the next 20 minutes, Aurora laid out her vision for Apex Solutions. She watched Maria's expression change as the scope of the opportunity became clear. Not just a job, but a chance to build something revolutionary with people who understood the technology's potential. The quantum processing work alone would be worth joining, for Maria said finally, but what you're describing. It's what Nexus should have been. It's what Nexus could have been. Aurora corrected, before they decided that innovation was too risky and that leadership was a boys' club. Maria closed her laptop with a decisive snap. When do we start? By 6 o'clock that evening, Aurora had secured commitments from 8 engineers, 2 product managers, and 1 very talented head of sales who'd been languishing at a mid-tier consulting firm. Each conversation had followed a similar pattern. Initial surprise, growing excitement, and ultimately the recognition that this was the opportunity they'd been waiting for. The last call of the day was the most delicate. James Parker answered on the second ring, his voice carefully neutral. Aurora, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Walk with me, she said. She was standing outside Nexus's headquarters, watching employees stream out of the building at the end of another day in corporate purgatory. Coffee shop on 3rd Street. 20 minutes. The coffee shop was nearly empty, just a few late workers and students with laptops. Aurora chose a table in the back corner, away from potential eavesdroppers. James arrived exactly on time, his expression a careful mask of professional friendliness. "I assume this isn't a social call," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I'm starting a company," Aurora said without preamble. "Apex Solutions. We're going to build the next generation of enterprise software, starting with quantum processing integration." James's poker face was impressive, but Aurora caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Congratulations, I'm sure it will be very successful." "It will be, especially with the right intelligence about market opportunities and competitive weaknesses." The words hung between them like a loaded weapon. James understood what she was offering and what she was asking for. Information, inside knowledge, access to Nexus's strategic plans and operational vulnerability. "Aurora," he said carefully, "what you're suggesting could be mutually beneficial," she finished. "James, you know what's going to happen under Marcus Chen's leadership. You've seen his type before. He'll make flashy changes for the first 6 months, trying to put his stamp on everything. He'll reorganize departments, cancel projects he doesn't understand, and alienate the talent that actually drives innovation. By year 2, when the quarterly numbers start declining, he'll blame it on market conditions and pivot to cost-cutting measures." James said nothing, but his silence was confirmation enough. "I'm offering you a chance to be part of something better," Aurora continued. "And in the meantime, if you happen to notice opportunities where Apex might provide superior solutions to Nexus's existing clients, well, that's just good business intelligence. You're asking me to spy on my own company. I'm asking you to choose sides," Aurora said, "between a company that values loyalty and innovation and one that just proved those things don't matter." James stared into his coffee for a long moment. When he looked up, his decision was written in his eyes. "What do you need to know?" Aurora smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Everything." 3 weeks later, Aurora stood in the converted warehouse that would serve as Apex Solutions headquarters, watching her team transform empty space into something extraordinary. The building hummed with the energy of creation, engineers setting up workstations, product managers sketching user flows on whiteboards, and the sweet chaos of a startup finding its rhythm. Her phone buzzed with a text from James Parker. "Global Tech Renewal Meeting today. Chen presenting solo. Client concerns about new leadership direction." Aurora's pulse quickened. Global Tech Corporation, Nexus's largest client, representing $37 million in annual revenue. She'd cultivated that relationship personally over 5 years, flying to Chicago quarterly to meet with their CTO, understanding their infrastructure needs better than they understood them themselves. Marcus Chen had never even spoken to them directly. "Zoe," Aurora called across the open floor plan. Conference room. Now, her partner looked up from the quantum processing prototype they'd been developing, her hair escaping from its ponytail in the way that meant she'd been deep in code for hours. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Aurora said, her smile sharp as a blade. "Everything's perfect." In the conference room, Aurora pulled up Global Tech's file on her laptop, 3 years of meeting notes, technical specifications, expansion plans, pain points. She knew their systems better than most of their own engineers. "Marcus Chen is presenting to Global Tech today," she said. Alone, trying to reassure them that Nexus's new leadership won't disrupt their service. Zoe frowned. "And that's good news because Marcus has never worked with enterprise clients at this scale. He thinks CTO means Chief Technology Officer, when really it means Chief Skepticism Officer. These people have been burned by consultants before. They can smell corporate bullshit from orbit." Aurora's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up Global Tech's current architecture diagram. "Look at this. They're still running legacy systems from 2019. integrated with our quantum processing module. Last quarter, their CTO mentioned wanting to modernize, but Nexus couldn't provide a migration path that didn't involve 18 months of downtime. But we could, Zoe said, understanding dawning in her eyes. We could. In fact, I designed a solution for exactly this problem 6 months ago. Nexus shelved it because the development cost didn't fit their quarterly projections. Aurora opened another file, detailed technical specifications for a seamless migration protocol, one phone call, and we could have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Zoe was quiet for a moment, studying the screen. Aurora, if we do this, there's no going back. This is corporate warfare. No, Aurora said. Corporate warfare is what they did to me. This is just business. At 2:47 p.m., Aurora's phone rang. Elizabeth Chen, no relation to Marcus, despite the shared surname, was Global Tech's CTO, and one of the most respected voices in enterprise technology. Aurora had spent countless hours earning her trust and respect. Aurora. Elizabeth's voice carried a note of confusion. I just got out of the strangest meeting. This new CEO of yours, he doesn't seem to understand our technical requirements at all. Aurora stepped onto the warehouse's rooftop, where she could speak privately while watching the San Francisco skyline. I heard there was a leadership change. How did it go? Honestly, it was concerning. He kept talking about synergistic optimization and paradigm shifts. But when I asked about the migration protocol we discussed last quarter, he had no idea what I was talking about. He actually suggested we might want to consider a complete system rebuild. Aurora's grip tightened on the phone. Marcus had just suggested that Global Tech spend millions on an unnecessary overhaul. Exactly the kind of consultant thinking that made CTOs break out in hives. That's ambitious, Aurora said, carefully. That's expensive and stupid. Elizabeth replied bluntly. Aurora, I have to ask. Are you still with Nexus? Because frankly, you're the only person there who actually understands our needs. The question hung in the air like a gift wrapped in ribbon. Aurora could have deflected. Could have maintained professional loyalty to her former company. The old Aurora might have done exactly that. Actually, Elizabeth, I've started my own company, Apex Solutions. We're focused on exactly the kind of technical challenges you're facing. Real interest sharpened Elizabeth's voice. What kind of solutions? The kind that don't require you to rebuild everything from scratch. In fact, I think we might have exactly what you're looking for. Would you be interested in a presentation? 2 hours later, Aurora was on a plane to Chicago, carrying a laptop bag filled with technical specifications and a presentation that would either launch Apex Solutions into the stratosphere or destroy her credibility forever. The flight gave her time to think about what she was doing. This wasn't just poaching a client. This was dismantling 18 years of professional relationships in service of revenge. Elizabeth Chen trusted her, had specifically called her after a disappointing meeting with Marcus. Was Aurora exploiting that trust? She thought about the boardroom, about David Thornton's condescending explanation of fresh perspective, about Marcus Chen's practiced smile as he talked about learning from her experience, about 18 years of loyalty rewarded with dismissal. The plane descended through Chicago's evening clouds, and Aurora felt her resolve crystallize like ice forming on the windows. They'd made their choice. Now she would make hers. Global Tech's headquarters occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in the Loop. All clean lines and corporate efficiency. Aurora arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, carrying a confidence built on years of preparation and months of anger. Elizabeth met her in the lobby, her handshake firm and her smile genuine. I have to admit, when you said you'd started your own company, I was skeptical. But your technical proposal was impressive. Wait until you see the demonstration, Aurora replied. The conference room held 8 people. Elizabeth, her technical team, 2 VPs, and the CEO himself. Aurora connected her laptop to the presentation system and felt the familiar rush of being exactly where she belonged, in front of technical minds, solving problems that mattered. 3 years ago, she began, When global tech first integrated with Nexus's quantum processing platform, we identified 17 potential upgrade paths for future expansion. Today, I'm going to show you how Apex Solutions can implement the most efficient of those paths, with zero downtime and 60% improved performance. For the next 40 minutes, Aurora walked them through technical specifications that made their current system look like a horse and buggy. She demonstrated processing speeds that seemed impossible, showed integration protocols that would connect seamlessly with their existing infrastructure, and outlined a migration timeline that would have them upgraded in 3 months instead of 3 years. The room was silent when she finished. Then Elizabeth started asking questions. Technical, detailed, brilliant questions that proved she understood exactly what Aurora was offering. The quantum coherence, stability alone would revolutionize our data processing, Elizabeth said, but the cost would be 60% less than a complete system rebuild. Aurora finished. And I'm prepared to offer a performance guarantee. If we don't deliver the promised improvements within the specified timeline, Apex will cover all migration costs and return your systems to their current state at no charge. The CEO, a pragmatic man named Richard Walsh, leaned forward. That's a significant guarantee. You're confident in your technology. I'm confident in my team, Aurora said. We built the foundation of this system at Nexus. Now we're building the evolution. Elizabeth and Richard exchanged glances. Aurora recognized the look, the moment when technical possibility met business opportunity, and produced a decision. When can you start? Richard asked. That evening, Aurora sat in her hotel room, overlooking Lake Michigan, a signed contract on the table beside her laptop. $37 million in annual revenue, transferred from Nexus to Apex with the stroke of a pen. But more than that, validation that her vision was not just viable but superior. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from Nexus, including 3 from Marcus Chen himself. She ignored them all and called Zoe instead. How did it go? Zoe asked immediately. We just landed our first major client, Aurora said. And Nexus just lost theirs. The silence on the other end was heavy with understanding. They'd crossed a line today, moving from corporate rebellion to active warfare. Aurora, Zoe said finally, promise me something. Promise me we're building something real, not just tearing down something old. Aurora looked out at the city lights, reflecting on the dark water of the lake. Somewhere in San Francisco, Marcus Chen was probably in an emergency board meeting, trying to explain how he'd lost their biggest client, 3 weeks into his tenure as CEO. We're building the future, Aurora said. Everything else is just collateral damage. But as she ended the call and stared into the Chicago night, she wondered if Zoe was right to worry. The line between justice and revenge was blurring with each strategic move, and Aurora was discovering that she enjoyed the game more than she'd expected. Much more. The news broke at 6:23 a.m. Pacific Time, splashed across TechCrunch's homepage with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Nexus Technologies loses major client to startup founded by former executive. Aurora read the article over her morning coffee, watching her carefully orchestrated narrative take shape in real time. The reporter had done his homework, sources inside global tech, praising Apex's innovative approach and superior technical understanding. Unnamed Nexus employees expressing concerns about new leadership direction. Her phone had been buzzing since 5 a.m. with calls from journalists, investors, and former colleagues. She'd ignored them all, except for one text message that made her stomach clench. We need to talk, Rebecca Thompson, her former protege, the idealistic first-generation college graduate, who joined Nexus believing she could change the world through technology. Aurora had mentored her for 3 years, watched her grow from eager intern to brilliant product manager, seen her navigate the casual sexism and imposter syndrome that plagued every young woman in tech. Aurora stared at the message, remembering Rebecca's face during her last day at Nexus. The confusion, the hurt, the desperate question. Why didn't you fight for us? She'd been too raw then to explain, too focused on her own betrayal to consider the collateral damage. But Rebecca was still at Nexus, still believing in a company that would ultimately disappoint her just as it had disappointed Aurora. The warehouse buzzed with activity when Aurora arrived. Her team had doubled in size over the past week, engineers and product managers, defecting from established companies, to join what industry blogs were calling the most intriguing startup of the year. The global tech contract had given them credibility. Word of mouth was bringing them talent. Aurora Maria Santos called from her workstation. "We've got a problem with the quantum coherence algorithms. The processing speed is incredible, but we're seeing stability issues at scale." Aurora walked over, grateful for a technical challenge that didn't involve moral complexity. The code on Maria's screen was elegant, but flawed, a classic optimization problem that required balancing performance with reliability. "Try implementing a dynamic load balancing protocol," Aurora suggested, pointing to a specific function. "And add redundancy checks every 50 iterations." Maria's fingers flew across the keyboard, implementing the changes in real time. Aurora watched the performance metrics stabilize, the system finding its optimal rhythm. "Brilliant," Maria breathed. "How did you see that so quickly?" "Experience, Aurora. I've been fighting these same problems for years." It was true but incomplete. The real answer was that Aurora had solved this exact problem 18 months ago at Nexus, in a research project that the board had ultimately shelved as too experimental. Now that solution was giving Apex a competitive advantage that would be nearly impossible for Nexus to match. "Aurora," Zoe's voice carried a warning note. She was standing by the conference room, holding her phone with an expression that suggested bad news. Aurora followed her into the glass-walled space, closing the door behind them. "What is it?" "I just got off the phone with Jennifer Walsh. She's reconsidering the offer to join us." Aurora felt something cold settle in her stomach. Jennifer was supposed to be their head of AI development, the brilliant researcher who'd been marginalized at Nexus despite her groundbreaking work. Her defection would have been a significant blow to their former employer. Why? Because Marcus Chen called her into his office yesterday, offered her a promotion, a raise, and the resources to restart her AI ethics project. Zoe's expression was troubled. "He's not as stupid as we thought, Aurora. He's fighting back." Aurora walked the window, staring out at the city where corporate battles were fought with stock options and strategic hires. Marcus was adapting faster than she'd expected, recognizing that his biggest vulnerability was talent retention. If he could stop the hemorrhaging of key employees, he might stabilize Nexus before her plan could truly damage them. "What else?" Aurora asked. She could tell Zoe was holding something back. "Rebecca Thompson. She's leading a retention committee, trying to convince people to stay. She's using your name, Aurora, telling people that the real Aurora Smith would want them to fight for Nexus from the inside, not abandon it." The words hit Aurora like a physical blow. Rebecca was weaponizing her own mentorship, using Aurora's legacy to undermine her current strategy. It was brilliant, and heartbreaking in equal measure. Aurora's phone rang. The caller ID made her pause. Sarah Chen, Marcus's wife, the former journalist who'd given up her career to support her husband's ambitions. "Mrs. Chen." Aurora answered, her voice carefully neutral. "Please, call me Sarah, and I think we need to meet." 2 hours later, Aurora sat across from Sarah Chen in a quiet cafe in Russian Hill, studying the woman who'd married her enemy. Sarah was younger than she'd expected, probably early 30s, with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to asking difficult questions. "You're investigating your husband," Aurora said. It wasn't a question. Sarah's smile was rueful. "I'm investigating the company my husband is supposed to be leading. There's a difference." "And what have you found?" "That Nexus is hemorrhaging talent, losing clients, and facing a crisis of confidence that started the moment the board passed you over for CEO. Sarah leaned forward. "I also found that a significant portion of their current technical capabilities came from innovations you developed over the past 5 years. Aurora sipped her coffee, buying time to think. Sarah Chen was dangerous, not because she was hostile, but because she was genuinely seeking the truth. That made her unpredictable. Your husband is the CEO now, Aurora said. Shouldn't you be supporting him? I supported him by giving up my journalism career. I supported him through 3 job changes in 5 years. I supported him when he took a position that should have gone to someone with 18 years of experience building that company. Sarah's voice carried a note of steel. But I won't support him if he's destroying something valuable through incompetence. What do you want from me? The truth. Is this really about building something better, or is it about revenge? The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Aurora could lie, could craft a response about innovation and competition and market dynamics. But something in Sarah's expression suggested she'd see through corporate speak immediately. Both. Aurora said finally. I'm building something better because they gave me no choice. And yes, I want them to regret what they did to me. Even if it hurts innocent people. People like Rebecca Thompson, who believed in you. Aurora felt something twist in her chest. Rebecca is a brilliant young woman who deserves better than Nexus can give her. She'll figure that out eventually. Will she, or will she be collateral damage in your war with Mark? The words echoed Zoe's concerns, the growing unease. Aurora had been trying to ignore. How many people would be hurt by her campaign? How many careers would be damaged? How many dreams deferred? How many bright young minds caught in the crossfire? Aurora's phone buzzed with another message from Rebecca. Please, just 5 minutes. There are things happening that you need to know. Sarah followed Aurora's gaze to the phone. She's been trying to reach you. I know. You're afraid to talk to her. I'm not afraid of anything, Aurora said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. She was afraid that Rebecca would make her feel guilty about choices she couldn't undo, afraid that seeing the disappointment in her protégé's eyes would force her to confront what she was becoming. Aurora, Sarah said gently, I've spent my career investigating powerful people who justify terrible actions by telling themselves they're fighting for a greater good. The dangerous ones aren't the obviously corrupt, they're the ones who start with legitimate grievances and let those grievances consume them. Aurora stood abruptly, the conversation cutting too close to thoughts she wasn't ready to examine. Thank you for the coffee, Sarah, but if you're looking for someone to feel sorry for your husband, you're talking to the wrong person. As she walked away, Aurora could feel Sarah's eyes on her back. Another variable in an increasingly complex equation, another person who might complicate her carefully laid plan. Her phone buzzed again. Rebecca, persistent as always. The retention committee isn't what you think it is. Marcus is using it to identify potential defectors. People are getting fired, Aurora. Good people. People you mentored. Aurora stopped walking, reading the message again. Marcus wasn't just trying to retain talent. He was purging potential dissidents, people who'd worked with her, learned from her, shown even the slightest inclination to question his leadership. For the first time since this began, Aurora felt a flicker of something that might have been doubt. She'd wanted to hurt Marcus Chen and the board that had betrayed her, but she hadn't wanted to hurt the brilliant, idealistic young people who were just trying to build careers in an industry stacked against them. The war was escalating beyond her control and the casualties were mounting. The question was whether she cared enough to change course, or whether victory had become more important than virtue. Standing on a San Francisco sidewalk, Aurora realized she wasn't sure she knew the answer anymore. Elena Vasquez had been investigating Silicon Valley's power dynamics for 7 years, long enough to recognize the signs of a corporate war brewing beneath the surface of press releases and earnings calls. The email that landed in her inbox at 9:47 a.m. was exactly the kind of tip that made her pulse quicken. An anonymous message with a single attachment. Nexus Technologies Internal Retention Committee meeting minutes from the previous week. She opened the document and felt her investigative instincts sharpen. The minutes read like a hit list, disguised as corporate strategy. 17 employees flagged for performance concerns, or cultural misalignment, all of whom had worked closely with Aurora Smith. The pattern was too clear to be coincidental. Elena pulled up her research files on Aurora Smith, the tech executive whose sudden departure from Nexus had triggered a cascade of industry gossip. On paper it looked like a standard corporate transition. In reality, it smelled like the kind of systematic bias that had become Elena's specialty to expose. Her phone rang. Thomas Wright, Nexus's founder returning her call from yesterday. Miss Vasquez, his voice sounded tired, older than his 63 years. I understand you're working on a story about leadership transitions in tech companies, among other things, Elena said, settling back in her chair. I'm particularly interested in how boards make decisions about executive succession. Would you be available for a brief conversation? The pause stretched long enough to be telling. I suppose I could spare a few minutes. An hour later, Elena sat across from Thomas Wright in his Palo Alto office, a space that felt more like a museum than a workspace. Awards and photographs chronicled 30 years of innovation, with Aurora Smith appearing in nearly every image from the past decade, cutting ribbons, shaking hands with clients, presenting at conferences. You built something remarkable here, Elena said, gesturing to the wall of achievement. We built something remarkable, Thomas corrected. Aurora was doing the most brilliant minds I've ever worked with. Her contributions to this company are immeasurable. Then why isn't she the CEO? Thomas's hands fidgeted with a stress ball, his eyes avoiding Elena's gaze. The board felt that fresh leadership would better serve our strategic objectives, moving forward. It was corporate speak, perfectly calibrated to say nothing while sounding official. Elena had heard variations of it 1,000 times, usually from executives trying to hide uncomfortable truths. Mr. Wright, you've known Aurora Smith for 18 years. In your professional opinion, was she qualified for the CEO position? Of course she was qualified. She's extraordinary, more qualified than Marcus Chen. The stress ball compressed under Thomas's grip. Marcus brings a different perspective. Different experiences. Different gender. That's not what this was about. But his voice lacked conviction, and Elena heard the uncertainty that came from a man questioning his own choices. She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but persistent. What aren't you telling me, Mr. Wright? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, staring at a photograph of Aurora presenting the Harmony Project to a packed auditorium. There are things I regret, he said finally. Decisions that seemed right at the time but feel complicated in hindsight. Such as, I founded this company in my garage 30 years ago. Aurora joined us when we were nothing. 12 employees, bleeding money, on the verge of bankruptcy. She saved us, not once, but 3 times. And when it came time to choose her successor, he trailed off, the stress ball forgotten in his hands. You chose someone else. I chose safety. Or what I thought was safety. David Thornton convinced us that Aurora was too invested, too emotional about the company's direction. He said we needed someone who could make hard decisions without being clouded by sentiment. Elena's pen moved across her notepad, capturing not just the words, but the regret that weighted them. And now I watch Aurora build something that could destroy everything we created together, and I wonder if we made the biggest mistake of our professional lives. The afternoon sun slanted through Thomas's office windows as Elena drove toward her next appointment. She'd arranged to meet Rebecca Thompson, the young product manager who'd reportedly been leading Nexus's retention efforts. The address Rebecca had given her was a coffee shop in the Mission, far from Nexus's corporate headquarters. Rebecca was younger than Elena had expected, probably mid-20s, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested someone operating under significant stress. She'd chosen a corner table where they could speak quietly, her laptop bag clutched protectively in her lap. Thank you for meeting me, Elena said, settling into the opposite chair. I understand you've been trying to help Nexus retain key employees during this transition period. Rebecca's laugh was bitter. Is that what they're calling it? Employee retention? What would you call it? A purge. Rebecca glanced around the coffee shop, ensuring they couldn't be overheard. Ms. Vasquez, I need to tell you something, but I need your word that you'll protect my identity. Elena nodded. Deep background. Your name won't appear in any story. The retention committee is a lie. Marcus Chen isn't trying to keep people. He's identifying who to fire. Anyone who worked closely with Aurora, anyone who might question his decisions. anyone who might be disloyal to his vision. Rebecca's fingers tightened on her bag. 17 people so far. Good people, brilliant people, all gone. Elena felt the familiar thrill of a story breaking open. Do you have documentation? Rebecca hesitated, then slowly pulled a flash drive from her bag. Meeting minutes, email chains, termination notices. Everything. Why are you giving me that? Because Aurora taught me that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Rebecca's voice carried a note of steel that belied her youth. She'd never forgive herself if she knew what Marcus was doing to people who trusted her. Elena pocketed the flash drive carefully. Rebecca, are you sure you want to do this? Once this story runs, there will be consequences. There are already consequences. For me, for everyone who believed in this company's mission. Rebecca stood, shouldering her bag. At least this way, people will know the truth. That evening, Elena sat in her apartment, surrounded by documents, transcripts and timelines that painted a picture of systematic bias and retaliation. The story was bigger than she'd initially suspected. Not just about Aurora Smith's dismissal, but about the culture of Silicon Valley itself, the way brilliant women were sidelined and then blamed for the disruption that followed. Her phone rang. Marcus Chen, calling personally. Ms. Vasquez, I understand you've been asking questions about Nexus Technologies. I'd like the opportunity to provide context for your reporting. Elena smiled. In her experience, executives only called journalists directly when they were worried about what might be public. I'd be happy to include your perspective, Mr. Chen. When would be convenient? Tonight, if possible. This situation has been mischaracterized in some circles. I want to ensure you have accurate information. They met at an upscale restaurant in Soma, the kind of place where tech executives conducted business over expensive wine and carefully crafted narrative. Marcus Chen was exactly what Elena had expected. Polished, confident, radiating the kind of casual authority that came from never having to prove himself. I want to be clear about something, Marcus said, after they'd ordered. Aurora Smith is a talented individual, but she was not the right choice for CEO at this moment in Nexus's evolution. Why not? She's too close to the existing culture, too invested in maintaining the status quo. We needed someone who could make objective decisions about the company's future. Elena sipped her wine, studying Marcus's expression. Decisions like firing employees who worked with her. Something flickered behind Marcus's eyes. Surprise, calculation, concern. Personnel decisions are always difficult, but sometimes you have to make changes to move forward. 17 changes, all targeting people with connections to Aurora. That seems like more than coincidence. Ms. Vasquez, I think you may have been given some inaccurate information. Employee turnover during leadership transitions is normal. We're simply ensuring that our team is aligned with our new strategic direction. It was a masterful deflection, delivered with practiced sincerity, but Elena had heard too many similar explanations over the years to be convinced. What about Aurora's contributions to the company? The innovations, the client relationships, the revenue growth. I have tremendous respect for Aurora's past contributions, but past performance doesn't automatically qualify someone for a leadership role that requires different skills, such as strategic vision, stakeholder management, the ability to make difficult decisions without emotional attachment. There it was, the subtle implication that Aurora was too emotional, too attached, too female to lead effective. Elena had heard variations of this argument countless times, always delivered with just enough plausible deniability to avoid appearing overtly discriminatory. Mr. Chen, are you aware that Aurora has started her own company? Marcus's composure cracked slightly. I've heard rumor. I wish her well in her future endeavors. She's already secured at least one major client, someone who was formerly working with Nexus. Competition is healthy in our industry. It drives innovation, but Marcus's smile was strained now, and Elena could see the calculation behind his eye. He was wondering how much she knew, how much damage her story might cause. One final question, Elena said. If you could go back and make the CEO decision again, would you change anything? Marcus was quiet for a moment, his mask of confidence slipping just enough to reveal the uncertainty beneath. Ms. Vasquez, Leadership decisions are never perfect, but they're necessary, and I believe Nexus is better positioned for the future under my leadership. As Elena walked to her car after dinner, she thought about the story taking shape in her mind. It wasn't just about Aurora Smith or Marcus Chan or even Nexus Technologies. It was about power, bias, and the price of challenging systems that weren't designed to change. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. You're going to want to see this. A friend of justice." Elena smiled as she started her car. The story was about to get even more interesting. Marcus Chen stared at the resignation letter on his desk, the third one this week. Jennifer Walsh, their head of AI development, citing irreconcilable differences with current strategic direction. She was supposed to be safe. He'd offered her everything she'd asked for, doubled her research budget, promised her autonomy. But Aurora's influence ran deeper than he'd understood. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 4 o'clock. David Thornton had called it after Global Tech's defection became public, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The quarterly numbers were catastrophic. Revenue down 18%, client confidence shaken, stock price in free fall. Marcus walked to his office window, looking out at the city where his career was disintegrating in real time. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent years moving between companies, always staying ahead of failure, always positioning himself for the next opportunity. But Aurora Smith had trapped him here, made him accountable for the first time in his professional life. His phone rang. Sarah, calling from their Pacific Heights home. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice carrying a concern that made his chest tight. "I'm fine," he lied, "just busy with the transition." "Marcus." The way she said his name made him pause. "I know about the retention committee, about the people you've been firing." Marcus closed his eyes. Sarah had given up her journalism career for him, trusted him to be worthy of that sacrifice. Now she was investigating him like any other corrupt executive. "It's complicated, Sarah. You don't understand the pressures. I understand that you're becoming someone I don't recognize. Someone I'm not sure I can support." The line went quiet and Marcus found himself staring at his reflection in the window. When had he become the kind of man who fired people for loyalty to his predecessor? When had survival become more important than integrity? "We'll talk tonight," Sarah said finally, and hung up. At Apex Solutions, Aurora felt the walls closing in from multiple directions. Elena Vasquez's investigation was progressing faster than expected. Her assistant had called that morning, requesting comment on allegations of systematic retaliation at Nexus. James Parker was becoming increasingly paranoid, sending cryptic texts about security concerns and watching his back. But the real problem was sitting across from her in the conference room, resignation letter in hand. "Zoe, please, just hear me out." Her partner's expression was stone cold. "I've heard enough, Aurora. Jennifer Walsh told me what really happened. You didn't just recruit her, you manipulated her, used her frustration with Marcus to make her think leaving was her idea." Aurora felt something crack inside her chest. "I gave her an opportunity to do meaningful work with people who value her contributions. You exploited her trust, just like you're exploiting James Parker, just like you exploited Rebecca's loyalty to silence her concerns." Zoe stood, her movements sharp with anger. "This isn't justice anymore, Aurora. This is revenge, and it's poisoning everything we're trying to build. Without aggressive recruitment, we'd still be a startup with good intentions and no resources." Aurora shot back. "Every successful company in Silicon Valley was built on poaching talent and stealing market share. At least we're honest about it. Are we? Because I'm starting to think you've been lying to me from the beginning." Zoe's voice carried a note of betrayal that cut deeper than any boardroom dismissal. "You told me this was about building something better, but really it's about destroying Marcus Chen and anyone who gets in your way." The conference room fell silent except for the hum of servers in the adjacent workspace. Through the glass walls, Aurora could see her team, brilliant engineers and product managers who'd believed in her vision, who'd trusted her to lead them towards something meaningful. "If you resign now," Aurora said quietly, "you'll destroy everything we've built. The quantum processing project, the global tech implementation, the dozen other innovations we're developing. All of it collapses without your technical leadership. Maybe it should collapse. Maybe we built it on the wrong foundation. Zoe's words hung in the air like an indictment. Aurora watched her closest ally, her moral compass, her only real friend in this industry, walk toward the door. Zoe. Wait. Aurora's voice cracked slightly. I know I've made mistakes. I know I've pushed too hard, hurt people I didn't mean to hurt. But what we're building here, it's real. It's important. Don't let my failures destroy that. Zoe paused at the door, her hand on the handle. Then stop the war, Aurora. Call Marcus Chen. Find a way to end this before it destroys everyone you claim to care about. I can't. Not after what they did to me. Then you've already chosen revenge over everything else, including me. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Aurora alone in the conference room with her reflection in the glass walls. For 18 years she'd been the person others looked to for guidance, the leader who inspired loyalty and drove innovation. Now she was the architect of a war that was consuming everyone around her. Her phone buzzed with a text from James Parker. Emergency. Need to meet. They know. Aurora felt ice form in her veins. If Marcus had discovered James's double life, if he'd been feeding her information all along, then her entire operation was compromised. Worse, James could face criminal charges for corporate espionage. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the exit, passing workstations where her employees were building the future she'd promised them. None of them knew that their foundation was cracking, that their CTO had just resigned, that their CEO might be about to face a scandal that would destroy everything they'd worked for. The coffee shop in the Tenderloin was exactly the kind of place where corporate secrets went to die. Grimy, anonymous, cash only. James sat in a corner booth, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his hands shaking as he gripped his coffee cup. They found the file transfers, he said without preamble. Someone in IT noticed unusual access patterns to the client database. They're conducting a full security audit. Aurora slid into the booth across from him, her mind already calculating damage control scenarios. How much time do we have? Hours. Maybe less. Marcus brought in external investigators. They're imaging hard drives, analyzing network logs, tracking every document access for the past month. James's voice was barely above a whisper. Aurora, if they find evidence of what I've been doing, I'll go to prison. They won't find anything. You were careful. I wasn't careful enough. James's composure finally cracked. I've been lying to my colleagues, stealing from my employer, betraying people who trusted me, and for what? So you could feel better about being passed over for a promotion. The words hit Aurora like a physical blow. James, that's not it. It is exactly that. You dressed it up as justice, as building something better, but really you just wanted to watch Marcus Chen fail, and I helped you do it because I owed you my career. His laugh was bitter. Now I'm going to lose everything, because I couldn't tell the difference between loyalty and stupidity. Aurora reached across the table, but James pulled back. There has to be a way to protect you, if we can create reasonable doubt about the access patterns. No, James stood abrupt. I'm done, Aurora. I'm going to tell them everything, about the file transfers, about Apex, about your recruitment strategy, all of it. If you do that, you'll destroy yourself along with me. Maybe that's what I deserve. James looked down at her, and Aurora saw something she'd never expected in his eyes. Pity. The tragedy isn't that you're becoming like the people who hurt you, Aurora. The tragedy is that you don't even see it happen. He walked away without another word, leaving Aurora alone in a coffee shop that smelled like broken dreams and burned coffee. Through the grimy window, she watched San Francisco's evening fog roll in from the bay, obscuring the city in gray that matched her mood. Her phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages. Elena Vasquez, probably ready to publish her exposé. Zoe, perhaps offering one final chance at reconciliation. Employees wondering why their CTO had cleaned out her debt. Investors asking difficult questions about Apex's future. Aurora sat in the booth until the coffee shop closed around her, staring at her reflection in the dark window, and wondering when she'd stopped recognizing the woman looking back. Somewhere in the pursuit of justice, She'd lost sight of the difference between fighting for something and fighting against it. The war she'd started was about to claim its most important casualty herself. Elena Vasquez's expose went live at 6 a.m. Pacific time with the force of a digital earthquake. The glass ceiling breaks both ways. How Silicon Valley's gender wars are destroying innovation dominated every tech news feed, social media platform and industry newsletter within hours. Aurora read it in her empty apartment, watching 18 years of her professional life dissected with surgical precision. Elena had done her homework: interviews with former colleagues, leaked documents from the retention committee, financial analysis, showing Nexus's declining performance under Marcus's leadership. But the story's most devastating revelation came from an unexpected source: James Parker's confession. According to internal sources, Smith orchestrated a systematic campaign to destabilize Nexus Technologies through corporate espionage, client poaching, and strategic employee recruitment. While her dismissal from the CEO position appears to have been influenced by unconscious bias, her response has crossed ethical and potentially legal boundaries. Aurora's phone had been ringing since dawn. Reporters, investors, board members from both companies, and lawyers offering their services. She'd ignored them all, sitting in the same chair where she'd planned her revenge 2 months ago, watching her carefully constructed narrative crumble in real time. The Nexus board meeting was called for noon, emergency session. David Thornton's assistant had left 3 increasingly urgent voicemails demanding Aurora's presence to address recent allegations and discuss the company's future. At 11:47 a.m., Aurora walked into the same boardroom where her world had ended, wearing the same blue blazer she'd worn that day, but everything else had changed. The mahogany table that had once symbolized achievement now felt like a judicial bench. The men who'd betrayed her now looked haggard, their confidence replaced by the desperate energy of people watching their investments disintegrate. Marcus Chen sat at the head of the table, the CEO chair that should have been hers now looking like an electric chair. His usual polish was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who'd spent the night crafting resignation letters he wasn't sure he'd have the courage to submit. "Aurora," David Thornton began, his voice carrying none of its usual authority, "thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" Aurora settled into her chair with the same precision she'd used 2 months ago, but now it felt like taking the stand in her own trial. "The board has been reviewing recent events," Michael Foster said, shuffling papers that seemed to contain the wreckage of 2 companies, the media coverage, the client defections, the allegations of corporate espionage. Allegations. Aurora's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "I think James Parker's confession moved us past allegations." The room fell silent. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco sparkled in the afternoon sun, indifferent to the corporate drama playing out 40 floors above the street. Thomas Wright cleared his throat. "Aurora, I want you to know that some of us, the Streetcom have come to realize we made a mistake. A significant mistake." "Which mistake would that be, Thomas? Passing me over for CEO, or not foreseeing that I'd respond by trying to destroy the company I spent 18 years building?" Marcus Chen spoke for the first time since she'd entered. "Aurora, I understand your anger. If I were in your position—" "You'll never be in my position," Aurora cut him off. "You've never built anything lasting, never sacrificed everything for an organization that didn't value your contributions. You're a consultant, Marcus. You optimize other people's visions. You don't create them." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Aurora could see the truth of them reflected in Marcus's expression. The recognition that he'd inherited something he didn't understand, and watched it disintegrate under his leadership. "What do you want?" David Thornton asked finally. It was the question Aurora had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. 2 months ago, she would have demanded the CEO position, public acknowledgement of the board's bias, heads on spike. Now, sitting in the wreckage of her reputation and relationships, she wasn't sure what victory looked like anymore. "I want you to understand what you've lost," Aurora said quietly. "Nexus isn't just a company, it was a vision, a place where brilliant people could build the future without compromising their values. You traded that for the comfort of familiar leadership patterns." She stood, gathering her portfolio with the same precision she'd used during her exit 2 months earlier. But I want you to understand what I've lost too. In trying to prove my worth by destroying yours, I've become exactly the kind of leader I used to despise. Ruthless, manipulative, willing to sacrifice good people for strategic advantage. Aurora, Thomas said, the board is prepared to offer you the CEO position. Marcus has agreed to step aside. Aurora looked at Marcus, seeing not her enemy, but a man who'd been set up to fail by a board too cowardly to make the right choice initially. His relief at the prospect of escape was palpable. 2 months too late, Aurora said. I can't undo what I've done. Zoe Rodriguez resigned because she couldn't trust my judgment anymore. James Parker destroyed his career because I convinced him that loyalty to me was more important than ethical behavior. Rebecca Thompson and dozens of other talented people have been caught in the crossfire of my war. She walked toward the door, then paused. The CEO position you're offering me, it's worthless now. I've spent 2 months proving that I'm not the leader this company needs. What about Apex Solutions? Michael Foster asked. Aurora's smile was sad and self-aware. Apex will probably survive. Zoe was right. The technology is sound, the team is brilliant, and the mission is important. But it needs leadership that's focused on building something meaningful, not settling old scores. David Thornton leaned forward. Then what will you do? I don't know yet, Aurora admitted. For 18 years, my identity was tied to this company, to proving myself in an industry that didn't want to believe in me. Maybe it's time to figure out who Aurora Smith is when she's not fighting someone else's war. As she reached the door, Thomas Wright called her name one final time. Aurora, I'm sorry. For all of it. She turned back to look at the man who'd hired her straight out of MIT, who'd believed in her potential when no one else would. I know you are, Thomas, but sorry doesn't fix what we've broken. Aurora walked out of Nexus Technologies for the last time, leaving behind the dream she'd spent 18 years building and the nightmare she'd spent 2 months creating. The elevator descended through floors that held memories of triumph and innovation, carrying her toward an uncertain future that was entirely her own to define. For the first time in months, that felt like a beginning rather than an end. 3 weeks after the expose, Aurora sat in a small cafe in Berkeley, watching Zoe Rodriguez arrive through the window. Her former partner looked tired but somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulder. Aurora had been trying to arrange this meeting for days, and Zoe had finally agreed to one conversation, nothing more. You look terrible, Zoe said, sliding into the opposite chair. Aurora managed a rueful smile. I feel worse. It was true she'd barely slept since the board meeting, haunted by the wreckage of relationships she'd once treasured. Thank you for seeing me. Don't thank me yet. I'm only here because Rebecca asked me to. The mention of her former protégé made Aurora's chest tight. Rebecca had been one of the casualties of Marcus's purge, fired for her connection to Aurora despite her efforts to help Nexus retain talent. Another brilliant young woman, whose career had been damaged by Aurora's war. How is she? Working at a startup in Oakland. Brilliant as ever but disillusioned with corporate tech. She says the industry is broken, that people like you and Marcus have turned innovation into a blood sport. Zoe's expression softened slightly. She also says, you taught her that sometimes the most important thing you can do is admit when you're wrong. Aurora stared into her coffee, seeing her own reflection distorted in the dark surface. I've been wrong about almost everything for the past 2 months. Not everything. The technology was sound. The team you assembled was extraordinary. Global tech is thriving with our quantum processing implementation. Zoe leaned forward. But you're right about the rest. You let revenge poison something that could have been transformative. I keep thinking about that night in my apartment when I decided to start Apex. I told myself it was about justice, about building something better. But really, I just wanted to watch them suffer the way I had suffered. And did they suffer? Aurora considered the question. Marcus Chen had resigned as CEO, taking a consulting position with a firm in Boston. Essentially exile from Silicon Valley. David Thornton faced a shareholder lawsuit over the board's decision-making process. Thomas Wright had stepped down entirely, his health deteriorating under the stress. Yes, Aurora said, finally. But so did everyone else. So did you, James. Rebecca, all the brilliant people who got caught between my anger and their loyalty. Zoe was quiet for a moment, studying Aurora's face. There's something else. The reason I agreed to meet you. Aurora looked up, hope flickering in her chest. The Apex team wants to continue the work, without you. The words were delivered gently but firmly. They've asked me to come back as CEO. We'd focus on the technology, the innovation, the mission you originally articulated, but clean this time. Ethical. It should have hurt her own company rejecting her leadership. Instead, Aurora felt something like relief. That's exactly what should happen. You're not angry. I'm proud, Aurora said. And meant, you're doing what I should have done months ago. Putting the mission ahead of personal grievances. Zoe reached across the table and briefly touched Aurora's hand. For what it's worth, I think the Aurora who hired me 8 years ago would be proud too. She's still in there somewhere. As Zoe left, Aurora remained at the small table watching Berkeley students hurry past the window with their backpacks and dreams intact. For the first time in months, she wasn't planning her next strategic move or calculating competitive advantage. She was simply sitting with the consequences of her choices, finally ready to figure out what came next. 6 months later, Aurora Smith stood before a classroom of 28 graduate students at Berkeley's engineering school, chalk dust on her fingers and passion in her voice. The transition from corporate executive to professor had been jarring, a deliberate step away from the power games that had consumed her life. Innovation isn't just about technology, she told her students, erasing equations from the blackboard. It's about understanding the human cost of what we build. Every algorithm, every system, every breakthrough affects real people with real lives. A student raised her hand. Professor Smith, how do you balance innovation with ethics when there's competitive pressure? Aurora paused, remembering her own struggles with that exact question. You start by asking who benefits from your work and who might be harmed by it. Then you make sure the second group has a voice in your decision-making process. After class, Aurora walked across campus to her small faculty office. The space was modest, bookshelves lined with technical journals, a desk cluttered with student papers, and a single photograph of her Apex team on the day they'd launched their first successful prototype. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Just closed the global tech expansion deal. The team is incredible. Thank you for trusting us with your vision. Aurora smiled, typing back. It was never my vision, it was ours. I just forgot that for a while. Through her office window, she could see the bay where tech companies rose and fell like digital tides. Somewhere out there, brilliant minds were building the future, making the same mistakes she'd made, learning the same hard lessons about power and purpose. Her next class, Technology Leadership and Social Responsibility, was her favorite. These students would inherit Silicon Valley's legacy and either perpetuate its failures or transform its potential. Aurora had learned too late that true leadership meant building something larger than yourself, but it wasn't too late to teach others. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Rebecca Thompson stood in the doorway, older somehow, with the confidence that came from surviving disillusionment and choosing hope anyway. Professor Smith, Rebecca said with a grin, I hear you're corrupting young minds with dangerous ideas about ethical technology. Aurora laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd felt in months. Rebecca, what brings you to Berkeley? I'm starting a PhD program, studying the intersection of technology and social justice. Rebecca's expression grew serious. I want to understand how to build systems that don't just work for the people who create them. That's ambitious. I learned from the best, both what to do and what not to do. As the afternoon sun slanted through her office windows, Aurora realized that her greatest victory hadn't been destroying Marcus Chen or proving the board wrong. It had been learning that success meant something different than she'd spent 18 years believing. She was building again, not companies or products, but people, and for the first time since leaving MIT 2 decades ago, that felt like enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.